I think it shows a stunning lack of judgment to essentially let Mandelson resign himself from the Labour Party, or resign himself from the whip of the Labour Party in the House of Lords. It just seems inexplicable.
Every day around this time even, we like to discuss the stories of the moment, and this morning we are joined by broadcaster Albie Amankona. Good morning.
Good morning.
And the deputy editor of the House magazine, Sienna Rogers. Morning to you too.
Good morning.
It's been a busy day.
It has already been a busy morning.
Here are some of the stories we've covered so far on this programme.
Lord Mandelson has resigned from the Labour Party after files related to Jeffrey Epstein suggested he had received $75,000 from the paedophile financier and also lobbied against a tax on British bankers' bonuses. Lord Mandelson has said he regrets knowing Epstein, but also says he has no record or recollection of receiving the money. Dan Needle is the founder of Tax Policy Associates and has been digging into the new revelations. He told us that Lord Mandelson sent sensitive government discussions to Jeffrey Epstein.
Public, but we'll be publishing very soon, is that Mr. Mandelson forwarded internal number 10 discussions to Epstein, discussions about the future of the financial sector, discussions where Epstein responded with questions because he was clearly very interested.
And we have contacted Lord Mandelson to get his response to that. We've not had a reply so far. We'll let you know if we do.
It's a big claim, though, isn't it? That's a very serious allegation that Dan Needle has made. The Shadow Chancellor Mel Stride told us Keir Starmer should have removed Mandelson from the party instead of waiting for him to resign.
The Prime Minister actually should have acted decisively, and he should have been a member of the Labour Party, before today. He should have been out of it.
We've also been talking this morning about the story on the front page of The Times about NHS waiting list figures. The Prime Minister and the Health Secretary have been trumpeting Labour's success in cutting those lists. In November, the government said waiting lists were down by more than 86,000. But The Times has found that 82,000 cases left the list because of a process called validation. People are removed after doctors decide appointments aren't needed anymore, but The Times has found that in November, the actual number of appointments and operations went down. The chief executive of the leading health think tank, the King's Fund, Sarah Woolnow, told us she was worried about people getting bumped off waiting lists and missing out on necessary care.
We're worried that some people may being removed from the wait list, or they may not understand exactly what's happening. In some cases, for example, if they don't respond to communications, they may be removed from the wait list when exactly as you say, they still need care. So this does need to be handled incredibly carefully. And as I say, it's no substitute for increasing activity levels, really bearing down on the wait list.
January is usually the 1 month where Brits attempt to give up booze, but as the Times this morning reports, dry January has looked a bit damp around the edges. Waitrose usually sees a 42% drop in alcohol sales in January. However, this year the gap has narrowed to 25%. The Times wine critic Jane McCritty told us she isn't surprised that Britons are giving up.
January is a pretty miserable month most years, isn't it? I mean, the last 4 weeks, they've been dark, they've been wet. Yeah. Covered in bills. Surely it's the worst month in the year to kind of ease off alcohol. Frankly, according to the Waitrose statistics, I'm quite surprised we got to January the 12th before we started to spend a bit more on alcohol.
Well, that was Jane McWhitty there talking about dry or damp January. So we'll talk about that. We'll give a bit of thought to the NHS waiting list figures. And we might get on to talk about Green Party leader Zach Polanski, who wants to legalise all drugs, although he's never drunk alcohol or taken any drugs himself. Let's start, though, with those latest allegations and I suppose revelations from the Epstein files. Lord Mandelson has resigned from the Labour Party, and tax expert Dan Needle has told us that prosecutors should think about taking criminal action against him. Sienna, I want to start with you on this because, Mandelson obviously realised late last night that this was untenable. His membership of Labour was untenable. And at that point in time, he said he wanted to look back and work out what happened to this £75,000 payment, which he says he doesn't recall and he needs to investigate. That was obviously problematic enough. But now this morning we find out that there may also be documents which show that Mandelson forwarded internal government policy discussions to Jeffrey Epstein. And Epstein seems to be asking questions, apparently in a bid to make money out of some of those decisions. Where would that leave Peter Mandelson?
In big trouble. And And it also leaves the government in an uncomfortable position. And Keir Starmer, I mean, we had this drama over his appointment as US ambassador last year, which led to a lot of pressure on the Prime Minister and on his Chief of Staff, Morgan McSweeney, because a lot of Labour MPs will hear about the story again this time and think, right, well, this is Morgan McSweeney, we know, is a kind of protege of Mandelson. They have strong historical links. Keir Starmer not, but that's obviously fed into the decision to appointing him. And it will again put pressure on whether, well, lots of Labour MPs have said for a long time they would like McSweeney not to be Chief of Staff. So there's that kind of dimension to it. And I've long thought that in May, if the results are terrible, the Prime Minister could well kind of hit a sort of reset button in order to save his premiership by sacking McSweeney and saying he's turning around his operation. And this would kind of feed into that, I think. But why do they let it get to this point where they're not being proactive and they're waiting on Mandelson to make the decision rather than taking the credit themselves? It seems almost inexplicable from the outside. I think it's got to be doing with those kind of personal links, right? And I mean, I know from my own personal experience that McSweeney can stand up to Mandelson. I've got a little story to tell you. When I was editor of Labour List, this was my last job, it's kind of a Labour-focused publication, I was told that the board members had been getting a call from Peter Mandelson saying that I needed to be fired. And that was because I wasn't on message enough. Obviously, I didn't see my job as having to be on message for anyone in the Labour Party. And McSweeney was one of those directors of Labour List on the board. And obviously, he refused to fire me. So he can say no to Mandelson when he wants to. I don't know why he wouldn't in this case.
But that's a very telling example of the reach of Peter Mandelson. And really, this is something that people, I think, maybe we don't all understand in the sense that maybe Peter Mandelson is sometimes seen as a politician who used to be a big deal in the Labour Party but isn't anymore. That's not accurate. He was very involved in the campaign for Keir Starmer to be elected this time round, and he has a real reach into the party, the mechanisms, the ethos of it, the direction of travel. He runs right through the middle of that.
Exactly. He has connections everywhere, and this was during the Corbyn era, so he had no real power, but he was running parts of the so-called right of the party. He always exerts influence in all these various ways. I mean, journalists will know this, and everyone in the Labour Party who's held any position, I think, will know that.
And Albie, in terms of what this means for the Prime Minister, I mean, there are a lot of people who say we should really focus on the victims, we should focus on the women who've been trafficked, we should focus on trying to tell their story. But there are implications politically for Keir Starmer this morning. Can he navigate those?
Well, he's not navigated them very well so far, I think most of us could say. I think it shows a stunning lack of judgment to essentially let Mandelson resign himself from the Labour Party, or resign himself from the whip of the Labour Party in the House of Lords. It just seems inexplicable, as Sienna says, that Keir Starmer wasn't more forthright himself at making decisions to essentially stop what looks like corruption from really impacting the Prime Minister's message. It has not been able to do that. And he came into office, even before he was in office, talking about the fact that Tory sleaze was terrible and he was going to govern differently. And he's not really been able to do that. There is something which sticks in the throat for me a little bit with how a lot of media organisations have been covering the latest tranche of the Epstein files that have been released. And we haven't really been talking about Trump that much, I don't think. In fact, I remember watching, I think it was Sky News on Friday night and BBC News over the weekend, and they were very careful not to mention Trump at all, when actually we look at how some of the US media have been reporting this, notably CNN, for example, and they talk about the fact that Trump is mentioned in these files over 1,000 times, and some of the allegations that are alleged against him are quite salacious. And then we look at the people who are increasingly blamed for this, or two of the people that have been laser focused. We're looking at Ghislaine Maxwell, who was actually in prison for sex trafficking, a woman, and Peter Mandelson, and he deserves a lot of scrutiny, but he is a gay man. These are two people who have not been directly involved in some of the quite serious allegations of sexual assault that the victims are talking about. And I I'd like to see some of these men go down, actually, as well as Andrew Mountbatten Windsor, who is allegedly involved in this. I'd like to see some of these rich and powerful men around the world, some of them named directly in these files, given a little bit more scrutiny.
I mean, Sienna, why is it that you think we have not seen that? I mean, some of the allegations against Donald Trump, I think it's fair to say, have either never got very far or they are questionable. I mean, some of them are extreme that are included in these documents. And there are very legitimate political questions about Peter Mandelson, which is probably why there's a focus on that here, because it's relevant to this this government, this political persuasion. But why do you think we haven't seen any action against the many, many very powerful men who are named in these files?
Well, I don't know the answer to that question, but I would be very concerned to find out what the real answer is, because you can only speculate, and that speculation would be like very worrying, the conclusions that you come to. I mean, that clearly people are being protected.
It's also hard, you know this, Albie, but libel laws are very hard to overcome, and until you have alive people on the record with names and dates standing this stuff up, I wonder whether the Mandelson thing, there are dates about payments and there's dates about what that's very documented evidence. Andrew has never really actually faced any consequences for this formally, beyond he bought off a civil suit. He's not actually ever faced direct challenge for what he did or didn't do. I think the standard of proof, both for a media organisation to say X has done this, is pretty high. And I think although there is documents, there are names, I've not seen anything that absolutely slam dunks some of these guys, these very powerful men who are litigious. Donald Trump has made a name for himself in recent years of being litigious. He knows he will come after, people know they'll come out, he'll come after you and try and close you down if you say anything critical. So I'm sure that's part of it. But I do wonder, where's the bar in this in order to get some of this stuff actually over the line for there to be formal action?
I think for two of the biggest news organisations in the country to do what I essentially, as a viewer, saw as squash the story of Trump in these Epstein files, I thought was shocking, especially considering when there are other news organisations around the world who are reporting what is in the Epstein files. And that is perfectly allowed to say these allegations are in the Epstein files about this person. I don't think there's many legal concerns about that. But actually, I think you raise an important point about Mandelson and actually Andrew Mountbatten Windsor, and this is something else which has been discussed over the weekend. Of course, we've had senior figures in the government actually talk about the fact they want Andrew Mountbatten Windsor to go and testify, to go and be part of a congressional hearing about this, so we can actually get more information out of the very men who are alleged to be involved in this scandal, so we can actually get that concrete information like we've seen with Lord Mandelson. And on some of the information about Lord Mandelson, some of the defences that he's been making, I don't recall receiving tens of thousands of dollars from Jeffrey Epstein. I mean, it's ridiculous. We have the bank statements, as Dan Needle was saying earlier on. Some of this stuff is pretty much 99.9%. We can be certain that perhaps these transactions took place, and he can't remember. It's astonishing, really.
Should we just... I mean, Albie mentioned Andrew Mountbatten Windsor. There are still many, many questions and lots of allegations against him in the papers as well. I mean, is there anything really that can be done at this point that hasn't already been done? I mean, I think Chris Philp, the Shadow Home Secretary, was suggesting there should be something to do on his place in the line of succession. But is there anything realistically that any more action that can be taken against him at this point?
I don't know of much more that can be done. I think the royal family, it is obviously reputationally damaging for the royal family, but in another sense, the king is kind of powerless to a large extent at this point because of the action they've already taken, whereas the government's reputational damage from this in terms of its relationship with Mandelson, you don't choose your family, but you do choose your ambassadors and your ministers.
Yeah,
and that's a decision where there would have been vetting. There must have been some vetting. Why did that vetting not reveal some of this stuff? It raises all sorts of questions, as you've been saying.